Coming up this afternoon on the Dattitude podcast, it is a special PM time for the show on this Monday, and it's a special time for the Saints and Pelicans. And special doesn't always mean good. Does a coaching change for the black and gold mean things can get better in a hurry, or is it just the start of a long, painstaking process? We haven't talked at all about the Pelicans nearly this season because, frankly, they haven't done much worth talking about. Is this the lowest of lows, and will Willie Green suffer the same fate as Dennis Allen in the name of doing whatever it takes to improve a sinking franchise? It's the Lundy before Lundy Gras, and we're ready to get the celebration kicked off. Don't let this show bring you down. Only you can help us keep it positive, brother. And the roses and sunshine begin right now.
If you're looking for the latest scoop and in-depth interviews on the Saints, the NFL, the Pelicans, LSU, along with the best bets of the week, then lucky you. Along with high-powered, in-the-know guests who cover our teams, Jim Derry brings plenty of Dattitude. And he'll always tell you the way it is, or at least the way he thinks it is.
Where you at, Dattitude family? I know it's weird. It's the afternoon. What the hell are we doing here? I'll tell you in a minute. Did you get wet yesterday? It's a good thing they postponed all those parades. The great news is there are parades every day now, between now and Mardi Gras, including Endymion Saturday. More on that coming up in a minute. But we won't wait for Endymion or Mardi Gras. We'll throw you something here and now, mister. And we'll do it on Dattitude, episode number 348, presented by Evangeline Securities for a Monday, February the 24th, 2025. It is the penultimate, one of my favorite words, the penultimate episode of season 4. I'm your host, Jim Derry, 34 and a half years on the New Orleans sports media scene. And I thank you for being a part of this ever-growing Dattitude family, which I know isn't going to grow much today because we're on at a weird time. Hope we didn't throw you off being here in the afternoon. I had my wife, Mrs. Derry, had an important doctor's appointment that I felt like I needed to be with her at. So that was this morning, and I knew it would throw the timing of the show off. So hence, we are on 2 hours later than usual. No fear, we will be back Wednesday at our regular time of 11 a.m. Central Time. So I know I had a couple of people text me and message me. I'm okay. Everything's okay. No, we will. Are we gonna have a show today? We are gonna have a show. It is right now, and that is why we're here a little late. So, nothing to be alarmed about. We'll talk about it if we have to talk about it, but all good. What is on the show today? Well, we're gonna talk to David Grubb, who we haven't talked to in a long time. He is our Pelicans expert. He and Christian Clark have been our Pelicans experts since we started the show. Christian Clark is now covering the Mavericks, no longer here at NOLA.com. David Grubb, local Pelicans expert, and is a host of the Bird Calls and is all over New Orleans sports radio. He's going to be on today. He's going to talk about Pelicans and Saints. So he's an expert on both of those things. We're going to have him on this afternoon. We're going to have Mono E Monday just because we have a guest for about a half an hour. We are going to talk to you like we always do. Lots of things to talk about this morning. We got breaking news coming up in just a minute. In case you didn't hear, Saints made some coaching moves this morning. That is coming up. Doug Mouton will be on the show Wednesday on our final show of season 4. That's right. I'm taking a little break after this week. I always take a break during Mardi Gras, and this year is no different. Going to recharge the batteries. We're going to have season 5 starting. It is scheduled to start on Monday, March 17th. We're going to have a little luck of the Irish. Maybe that'll be lucky for everybody. Starting on March 17th. That's when season 5 will start. We have a new open. I know a lot of you are saying, you got Brandon Ingram still in your open. I get it. I know. I haven't had time to make a new open. We will do that over the little break. Career day. Had career day on this past Friday, which is why there was no Friday show. And my sister, have you ever tried to talk to 9 groups of 25 8th graders and give them the same, go to do the same presentation, about 20 to 25 minutes each? It was close to 4 hours. It was interesting. The good news is we have a few more subscribers. Apparently, a few of them have subscribed to the Dattitude podcast. We welcome them in. Why not? We use much youth as possible here in the show. It was interesting. So let's see. I think it was somewhere just shy of 200 kids that I talked to. It was alarming. How many kids have ever heard of the Times-Picayune? Of the close to 200 kids, including my own kid had heard of the Times-Picayune, but she didn't know what the Times-Picayune was. My own kid. Four kids knew what the Times-Picayune was. It's insane to show you where we have come in the last 15, 20 years. That's right. The newspaper is trying to reinvent themselves. Our own newspapers across the country. Hence, you got the Dattitude podcast. Maybe we'll talk more about that later on. Had a fun parade weekend. I know y'all want to hear about the Saints breaking news, so we're going to get into that, not to talk too much about the parade weekend. But yesterday, the one good thing about when it rains on a parade day and it rains everything out and everything's postponed, you can just sleep. And I got to be honest, I spent a lot of day yesterday laying around and trying to get back and get in the flow. And that's what we did yesterday. So breaking news this morning. In case you had not heard, and it's not just this morning, there was another two breaking news stories for the Saints. They have hired Terry Joseph, a local, a New Orleanian, to be their defensive passing game. Excuse me, he's going to be the defensive backs coach for the Saints. It will be his first NFL job. He has been coaching in the college ranks since 2006. Now, if you think that name might be familiar for those of you that are around in the New Orleans area, why is it familiar? Yes, his last name is Joseph. Yes, he is related to those Josephs, Vance and Mickey. He is their cousin. He's the cousin of current defensive coordinator of the Denver Broncos, Vance Joseph, who also was the head coach of the Denver Broncos for 2 years or 3? 2 years, right? And he's also the cousin who Vance's brother, Mickey Joseph, who is the current coach at Grambling. So yes, they what do they all have in common besides the fact that they're cousins? They played for Hank Tierney at Shaw. So anytime I can throw Shaw in there, I'm gonna. Terry Joseph, a proud Eagle, will be the next defensive backs coach for the Saints. At Texas, he had some pretty good defenses at Texas. Again, being the passing coordinator, Texas was number 7 nationally in passing yards allowed, just 173.8 yards allowed per game. And why that's so super impressive at Texas is because Texas was ahead in a lot of those games, and teams had to pass, and they still couldn't. The Longhorns also were first last year in interceptions with 22. Hopefully he can transfer that over here to the Saints. Also, this morning, breaking news, Kyle Wilbur is going to be the assistant special teams coach. He's only 35 years old. An infusion of youth into the Saints. I like it. We've talked about this already. I'm a big fan of the youth movement here with the Saints. He played with the Cowboys for many years, played with Kellen Moore, and now he will work for Phil Galliano, who was the previous assistant special teams coach, has been promoted when Darren Rizzi left and went to Denver. A lot of things have happened since we have talked last. It has been, 5 days since we last talked, or 6, whatever it is, last Wednesday. The Saints have hired their offensive coordinator. It's pretty much what we told you. Doug Nussmeier is the offensive coordinator. His son Garrett is the quarterback at LSU. That'll make things interesting for him. It may make things interesting also in the future. If the Saints do keep Derek Carr, we'll get into that, and they're looking for a quarterback next year to draft, we'll see. Also, of course, we talked about defensive coordinator coming over. He was working for San Francisco last year, and also, as I'm sure all of you watch this show know, you are that educated. Brandon Staley, former coach of the Los Angeles Chargers, is going to be the defensive coordinator for Kellen Moore. They're going to reverse the roles. Brandon Staley was Kellen Moore's boss in 2 years ago when he was the coach of the Chargers, and Kellen Moore was the offensive coordinator. And now Kellen Moore will be his boss as Brandon Staley is the defensive coordinator. All right, we're going to have lots of comments this afternoon. I'm going to get to them in just a moment. You're going to be a part of the show. If you don't know this already and you are new to the show, you can type in your comment, whether you're watching on YouTube or Facebook. And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the Dattitude YouTube page. We had a lot of new subscribers over the weekend. We have jumped up on YouTube. Again, trying to get everybody to come from Facebook. Come watch us on YouTube. That is where the family lives. You can also click on the bell to receive notifications when we go in the air live. And you can always get in touch with me on X at Jim Derry Jr. or via email, jderry@theadvocate.com. All right, we got some comments in the queue this morning. Oh, boy. I'm going to show most of them. Let's see. Kyle Sherman, welcome. Good morning, Dattitude. Good morning to you, Kyle. Good morning, Brian S. Steve. Who Dat Nation? Christian loves the show. Let's go, Derek Carr. I'm sure that'll get you some interesting comments. Dylan Smith. Jim Derry about to spit that fire. I've had all weekend to get my fire back. Hope all went well with my wife. Thank you. Thank you. Looks like it's gonna be okay. We'll talk about it if we have to. Right now we don't have to. So Jimmy Rosen, hello, who that's. Dylan says he thinks it's a good hire with Terry Joseph. Christian, what is Mardi Gras? Why so many parades? You gotta have parades. What are you from New Orleans? Because if you're not from New Orleans, or if you're just yanking my chain, Mardi Gras is my time. That's when I take time off. It is my favorite time of year. Other than football season, of course. Other than football season. Dylan Smith, by the way, happy birthday. You turned 43 today. It made your day when you saw the 1 p.m. showtime. Well, I'm glad I could make it work for you. And if you think 5 days is too long with no me and no Dattitude, oh, you're about to have what? After Wednesday, it's going to, I don't know. I can't count. It's a lot of days. Something like 18. 18. All right, you're from the Bay Area. Christian's from the Bay Area. You don't know about Mardi Gras. Okay, well, basically, Mardi Gras is an entire season, although it's called the Carnival season here in New Orleans. To give you a quick, I'm sure you've seen Mardi Gras on TV. And when it really kicks up for us New Orleanians is this Mardi Gras is on March the 4th this year. A week from tomorrow is Mardi Gras. And we're all off. While the rest of the nation works on Fat Tuesday, we do not. It is a day off. It is a celebration. We give the keys of the city to Rex, who will parade up St. Charles Avenue past Gallery Hall, where the Mayor LaToya Cantrell, will give him the keys to the city, and he will reign over New Orleans for a day. The parades, the first weekend of parades is always big for the families because it's mostly locals. That was this past weekend. We went to parades up here on Friday. And then Saturday, I spent almost the entire day. We got there about 10:30, stayed till about 7:30-ish when we were finally tired and we went to get some seafood. But spent the entire day on just off the corner of St. Charles in Louisiana. And it was a phenomenal day. We watched 5 parades. We missed the last one because we left a little bit early. And then went and had some seafood at Deanie's Seafood. I'll give him throw a free pub. It's one of my wife's family anyway. Deanie's Seafood. If you come to New Orleans, you got to go to Deanie's. So anyway, David Bordelon says he hopes I enjoy my vacation. It has been a long, long season. Michelle Castro Arreglado Neesmith, my favorite name to say on the show. Let's go and start the show. We are starting the show. I tell you what, though, before we get to the rest of the show, I've got to tell you about, because David Grubb is going to come on about 1:20. We've got about 5 minutes before he comes on. There are a couple things I want to get to before he comes on. So before we get to David and the rest of the show, let me tell you about our friends at Evangeline Securities. Of course, they're a company that can help you decide if it's the right time to sell your family-run or privately held business. And just as importantly, they can figure out what that business is worth. If that is you or someone you know, even if you live in the Bay Area, you can call them. They can help you. It's time to reach out to Evangeline's founding and managing partners, Nick Braden and Ron Hemel. They will start by scheduling a complimentary valuation from their offices, either in Poydras Street or in Lafayette. They also have a couple elsewhere in the United States. You can check them out. From there, you will be well informed and begin to make the decision on if you want to proceed. They will throw you something better than what I'm going to throw you in Endymion. That's right, I am in Endymion. Tell you more about that in a second. Who knows? Who knows what they have back there? Maybe they will throw you a platinum doubloon that weighs 5 pounds. What would that be worth? Well, I just looked it up. It would be worth just shy of $160,000. So I guess I better offer a disclaimer that I completely made that up, and there are no guarantees of platinum or gold or silver or copper or even aluminum. But they will help you. They will help you figure out what that business is worth. Then you can make the decision on whether you want to go forward or not. We'll fill you in more later in the show. In the meantime, you can check them out at www.evangelinesecurities.com. Telling you, give them a call. What else happened this weekend? Christian is a Raiders turned Saints fan. Well, we certainly welcome you into the program. What else happened here locally? You know what? It's not all bad here. And you see that 19 and 55, and I know some of you wouldn't wonder, what is that? Well, that is 5 and 12 plus 14 and 43. And that's where our current franchises are right now. The Saints finished 5 and 12. The Pelicans with a win yesterday over the San Antonio Spurs are now 14 and 43, 19 and 55 combined. What are the future are our teams? At least the immediate future. That's what we're going to talk about with David Grubb. Again, he's going to be on in just about 4 or 5 minutes. But there are positive things to talk about. And when I come back from vacation, of course, we're going to talk about Saints. Of course, we're going to talk about the upcoming draft. Of course, we're probably going to talk some about the Pelicans, but we're also going to talk about, again, some positive things. Where will the LSU women's basketball team be when I come back on March 17th? Hopefully making a deep run into March Madness. Do they have a chance to win a national championship? I got to say, after what I saw yesterday, I was so impressed by the LSU women's basketball team yesterday. Why? Because if you didn't see it, you missed a great one. They went to Lexington. They were down by 16 in the first half against the Wildcats and made a run. And I think the biggest part of that game was they scored 2 quick buckets right before the end of the half. They got to within 11 right before halftime. And that kind of propelled them. And they came out in the third quarter and they went insane. And I can't remember whether it was late third or early fourth when they finally took the lead, but when they took the lead, you knew it was pretty much over. Kentucky had no answers. They made a little run of their own and got back within it. In it, I'm telling you, this LSU women's team, they're going to have to beat a South Carolina. They're going to have to beat a Texas. There's no question, but they can do it. And I like this team, and I like what they showed yesterday. And we'll see. LSU baseball is 6-1. They play Dallas Baptist in Arlington on Wednesday. They get to play at the Rangers Field. Then they're playing that annual Texas tournament. They're playing in Frisco. They will play Kansas State, Nebraska, and Sam Houston. Big week for LSU baseball and a non-conference event. Tulane is also 6-1. David Grubb covers as a color analyst for Tulane basketball. They play in baseball. They will play at Pepperdine this weekend. So another local team playing a huge series this weekend. And I got to throw this in there. And I don't know if Nick's watching or not. I know he had some things going on this morning at UBN. His nephew, and I have had the pleasure, I get to call some Loyola baseball games here and there. Brandon Mooney. You don't know that name, but you might, because he is a hitting machine. I think he's got a chance to make it into the draft. He is lighting it up for Loyola. Loyola is 12-3 in NAIA play. Okay, so that just goes to 15 games. Brandon Mooney is hitting 560, and it's a legit 560, okay? I'm telling you, I got to cover a weekend series last weekend. The dude had 7 hits in 3 games. It is insane what he has been able to do. I mean, it is quite impressive. There's no doubt about it. So anyway, those are my weekend talking points. I definitely wanted to talk about LSU baseball because, again, not everything's negative, okay? And we don't know, are the Saints and Pelicans are they going to turn things around and be positive? Plenty to talk about. Again, David Grubb coming up in a few minutes. And when David's gone, I want to share some comments with you that I had from the last show. I've told you that things are really picking up on YouTube, so we're getting a lot more comments on the YouTube, and that's where I pay attention. Look, if you leave a comment after the fact on Facebook, I'm probably not going to see it. If you have a comment on Dat and you leave it after the fact, I probably will see it. So after we talk to David in just a few minutes, I'm gonna go over those comments because I think it's important we get the perspective of what this is the most important part of the offseason to me. Even I think this year more important than the draft. As important as the draft is for the Saints, because what is going to happen to the quarterback position? We're going to know by March 12th. The new calendar year starts on March 14th, but we're going to know, according to Luke Johnson, by March 12th, one way or the other. We're going to know. Christian says Carr ain't going nowhere. 3 years more. I think they're going to have to rework his contract. I'm going to ask David what he thinks in a minute. Hakeem, big dog, what's going on? Glad to have you here. Dylan says, great game by the Lady Tigers. Hate they let the Texas game slip away. Absolutely. But again, when you come back from a 16-point deficit, as the LSU Lady Tigers did on Sunday, I tell you what, man, they had me watching. I turned it on. They were down 16. I'm like, oh, let me watch for a little while. I'm telling you, that little run they made right before halftime was big. Was big. Let's see what else we got here. Uncle Deuce is the opposite. He said Carr needs to hit the road. All right. We're going to talk about Pelicans. We're going to talk about Saints with our friend David Grubb, who we have not talked to in quite a while. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. Glad to be back.
Glad to hear from you. And I'm sorry we haven't. Look, the Pelicans, man, it has been. I expected, you and I would probably talk in November, and I'm like, it's kind of a rough start. We'll have them on December. Oh, it's even worse. And it just never happened. But now we got to talk about them. The question, you see it up there on the screen, and if you're listening to the podcast after the fact, our header says, it can't get any worse than this. Can it?
No, I mean, this is the second worst season in the history of the franchise since it arrived in New Orleans. And it's eerily similar to that 2004-2005 season when the Pelicans won 18 games. The major difference is that the Pelicans actually have some very talented players on this roster. It's just that everything that you can possibly imagine has gone wrong this season. Even with that, there were cracks and some problems before the season began that you could see, but you could not see this coming. You could not see it being this bad. It's just been a complete disappointment and a lost season, really, though there are some things that you can salvage going forward.
Yeah, and look, but why has it got this bad? Why do you think, David, that it's gotten to where it's gotten this? It's mind-boggling to see how far they had come. And although things maybe dropped off a little bit last year, and I know we can say injuries all we want, but how did we get here?
Well, I asked David Griffin that when, after the trade for Brandon Ingram went down, and my belief has been that the problem was that they were building two teams at the same time. They were building a team for Zion Williamson and a team for when Zion was gone. And you can't do that. You had to go all in with your guy. And they never did that. They never built the team that worked for Zion Williamson because of his absences. I think they were constantly hedging their bets and hoping that Brandon Ingram would become equal to what Zion could provide. And that just wasn't, it became obvious, not just this year. It became obvious a couple of years ago that Brandon, as good as he is not that type of transformational talent. And when you have a transformational player, there are very few in the NBA, there are very few in sports. When you have a guy that you just know at their best, they're better than 99% of the other people in their league. And Zion Williamson is one of those people. When he's on the floor and at his best, there are very few athletes that we've seen who can do what he does. And I think that David Griffin made a mistake in roster building over the years in not creating the team that best accentuated his talents. Now you're starting to see some of the things shifting towards that, the kind of team that's going to optimize Zion's talent. The long-term question, of course, is 6 years in, that's what people have to remember. We are in year 6 of the Zion Williamson era.
I know. It's crazy to know that.
And if you look at NBA history, I'm going to ask you this question. Let's see how just off the top of your head to see if you can get this.
Uh-oh.
Since 1990, we're talking 35 years now, how many number one overall picks have won a championship with the team that drafted them?
Not the next year. You mean just in general?
In general, since 1990, how many number one overall picks?
I'm going to say not that many because they just normally leave when their first rookie contract is up. They go to the Lakers or they go wherever. And I know that's happening in the. I'm going to guess one.
Two.
Who are they?
Since 1990, the two are Tim Duncan.
Okay, makes sense. Spurs, they never leave.
Kyrie Irving, and people say, "What about LeBron?" You can't count LeBron because he left Cleveland.
Right. He won it when he came back.
Came back. So he was a free agent acquisition at that point. In that same period, only 8 number 1 picks have made a finals appearance with the team that drafted them. So the odds are heavily against the Pelicans, just in NBA, by NBA standards, of Zion Williamson taking them to an NBA finals. And now you're in year 6 of his career. So you have to wonder, how much time do you have left? And so I think this offseason, depending on where the Pelicans draft, like if they get a top 2 pick, if they get the number 1 pick again, let's say if that happens, if they end up with the number 1 pick or the number 2 pick, I think you have to strongly consider, even as good as Zion has been, maybe a future without him in the near future.
Yeah. Do you think that's possible? Can you see can you see them dealing him? And here's one thing that, you and I understand, because we are around this all the time, but when you see what they might get back from him, you're like, well, I can't do it if that's all they're going to get back, because you don't usually get back what the average fan thinks you should get back for somebody like a Zion Williams. What do you think that they could get for Zion?
Yeah, I think there are very few teams that can make an offer that the Pelicans would like. I think the thing that you're looking for, if you're trading Zion Williamson, let's look around what's happening in this league. And I think the Luka Doncic trade skewers value so much, because if you look at that, there's not a single person in the basketball world who says the Dallas Mavericks got equal value for a 25-year-old 5-time All-NBA selection who took you to the finals a year ago. No one is saying that the Dallas Mavericks got value. So if you're the New Orleans Pelicans and you go on the market with a 25-year-old Zion Williamson who's made 2 All-Star teams, and that's the height of his achievement, has never played in the playoffs, what can you realistically ask for? Well, I think what you're asking for is a starting caliber player, a legitimate, not a fringe starter,
right,
a legitimate starting player. And then what you're trying to find is either a first-round draft pick in this draft, which is one of the deepest drafts we're going to have over the next 4 or 5 years, and what you're looking for is favorable swaps down the road. And what you would have to do then is you're going to have to do what the Oklahoma City Thunder did, is take on some bad contracts in the short term in order to build up your assets again. Because remember, all the assets that you got from the original Anthony Davis trade are now gone.
Right.
Everything you got from the AD trade, players, picks, all gone.
And the Pelicans, unlike their counterpart on Airline Drive, actually are in really good shape money-wise, right?
Yeah, I mean, the Pelicans are not in bad shape. They've never gone into the luxury tax. I don't know, people say, well, that's because Gail Benson has been cheap with it, but she haven't had a reason. You're not going to go into the luxury tax for a team finishing 8th in the Western Conference, 8th, 9th, 10th every year. That's just insanity, especially with the penalties that come dollar for dollar once you get into that second apron now. So there are contracts that can get off relatively quickly. Zion's contract is not a guaranteed deal anymore. If he doesn't meet the standards, Pelicans can cut him and they're good financially. CJ McCollum only has 1 year on his deal, and it'll be only $30 million next year compared to the 33 he's getting this year. So his value goes down. You have Trey Murphy at a reasonable contract. Herb Jones at $13 million, even though Herb is likely gone through the first half of next season. I would say with that rotator cuff surgery, that's a 4 to 6 month just for the initial recovery and then getting him back into basketball shape. DeJounte Murray, again, another guy who won't be back in the second half of next season if he's back. Still a reasonable financial number. And then you have the rest of these guys like Kelly Olynyk, whose contract has 1 more year on it on a reasonable deal. Bruce Brown will be a free agent. You still have to fill out some bench, but you got Yves Missi on a rookie deal. So the financial problems are not there, but you may have to take on some bad contracts to get assets.
And DeJounte Murray, that just hurt my heart when that happened. I mean, it looked like he was going to be the guy that this team really wanted. He gets hurt, right when he gets here, and then things are looking better, like he's going to be able to and be the captain and the leader that you really need for this team. And then he's out for who knows how long. And it just goes to show you this team is just snake bit this year. And sometimes you just can't overcome things like that. No,
it's, they haven't had a point guard since Zion got here. That's what they've been looking for. And DeJounte, there were some struggles, certainly. He was not shooting the ball well this season, but he was starting to get more into a rhythm before he got hurt. He was playing better. There were still some defensive issues that the Pelicans, I mean, clearly this is the worst defensive team the Pelicans have ever put on the floor. They can't stop anybody. And
They
DeJounte
were
was
bad
having his
last year.
struggles there. But there were certainly some things but you could see his impact on a Zion Williamson, who has lauded DeJounte for making him a better player this season and keeping him, quite frankly, in shape. Like there's the one thing we cannot talk about with Zion Williamson this year is his shape. You look at him on a day-to-day basis, and I'm up close with him every day now. That he is in the best shape that I've ever seen him in.
David Grubb here with us this morning on this Monday morning Dattitude podcast presented by Evangeline Securities. David Grubb is the CEO of Hard in the Paint and also writes for the Bird Writes. Do y'all still do the Bird Calls? The podcast still going?
Yeah, it's coming back. It's just that we took a little break, but it's coming back. I'm doing an episode where I really go into this, the Zion Williamson and what those opportunities be. It's going to be match up with an article that should be out tomorrow as well. On just what the Pelicans' future is going to be and what their options are with Zion Williamson.
David has been covering the Pelicans for many a year and also is a color analyst for Tulane University, their basketball team. Had a crazy call, a week and a half or so ago on a three-pointer at the buzzer. Man, that was a lot of fun.
It's hard. I grew up in that era when Tulane basketball was really good and exciting. When Perry Clark was uptown and you had the posse and they were going to NCAA tournaments and going to the postseason on a regular basis. And that was one of those glints of just, hey, this is the excitement you can have when college basketball is good in this town. And that was a great win for Tulane. Obviously, they had a little setback against Wichita State this weekend, but still, if they can finish strong, they've got a position to get that double bye in the American Conference.
Man, David, we need more Louisiana, and I know the women's tournament and LSU is going to make a run, and they got a legitimate chance again to go to the Final Four and maybe potentially win another national championship. But our men's teams just overall they aren't very good, and it's good to see Matt McMahon's team and LSU then playing much better, and they won 2 games in a row, and they competed with Florida this Saturday, but. I mean, if Tulane can make it, that would be great for everyone. Let's get them in there and let's just see what happens.
This used to be a really great college basketball state.
It really was.
This used to be a really great high school basketball state. Like, I think people underestimate how good it was in the 90s and early 2000s. And we forget that, Hurricane Katrina changed so much.
It did.
And college basketball is a big part of that. We lost a lot of athletes who scattered to Texas and went to other places as far as the basketball. And we lost coaches. We lost a lot of great coaches, too. And I think we're finally starting to see some of that built up again. And hopefully we can get back to that place, because you're right. I mean, this is the basketball heritage in Louisiana, again, per capita. When you talk about how small this state is, and you talk about, you go all the way back to Centenary with Robert Parrish,
right.
When you go back to Willis Reed at Grambling, when you talk about with Dale Brown, who has outlived all of his contemporaries. It's like, it's always great to see Dale. But everybody who he was with during the SEC during his time, they're all gone, but Dale's still with us. But what he did for Louisiana basketball with Tim Floyd, who still hangs around goes to Tulane and UNO games and stuff. I mean, there were some great Perry Clark, Tick Price, the basketball minds. I mean, that was a time when Nichols was going to the NCAA tournament. There was just, everybody was good. And I'd love to see that back again.
I actually saw Tim Floyd. I do play-by-play for St. Paul's basketball in the North Shore and some Shaw games, but I actually saw Tim Floyd at a St. Paul's game last year hanging around with Joey Steibing just on a random night. I'm like, what in the heck is going on around here? So
these guys love basketball. Know. They love basketball. They will not let it go.
Yeah. You know what? As good of a coach, and Tim Floyd got a bad rap and took over a Bulls team he had no chance to win with, and only had, 1 year with the Hornets then, which I thought was ridiculous. Anyway, I think Tim Floyd is one of the best although he's not from Louisiana, I thought he's one of the greatest basketball minds ever to walk on a court around here. And we've had quite a few, like you mentioned.
And I was fortunate. I was one of those kids who went to the Tim Floyd basketball camp at the Lakefront Arena. I got to play against, some of his players when they
Yeah.
were, coaching there and helping out. I got to see the Irvin Johnsons and all those guys, and it's a great time to be out that way.
I was a sports editor of the Driftwood then, as a matter of fact. That was one of the great highlights of my life, just being around that team, being around Coach Floyd and him treating me like I was any other member of the print team around New Orleans. It was awesome. So I'm biased, but I'm always going to be a fan of Tim Floyd. So let's talk a little bit about now. Look, I want to pick your brain. We talked about the Pelicans, and look, I think we talked about how they have money and how they're going to get a solid draft pick. Who knows where it's going to land? This is a really strong draft coming up. You talk about it from maybe not as strong at the top as it usually is, but I think overall, when you talk about the quality and depth in this NBA draft, I think there is. It's going to be interesting to see as we move on here and talk about the Pelicans. And my big question this morning, again, for people who are listening to the podcast after the fact, are the Saints that, and I got that in gold, are they that far away? And that's the big question as we look at this team. Can they win soon, or is this a long rebuilding process?
I think the thing in the NFL is that you can rebuild quickly, but you got to take your medicine. At some point, and I think the Saints have avoided that, and that's always been the conversation: is when was the cap bill going to come due? And it's due in a number of ways. The age of the players and what you're paying them is the issue. Look, for any team, and I think the biggest thing that you saw with the Philadelphia Eagles, and we could talk about all the talent that the Eagles have, but their financial decisions are what helped them so much. The Eagles have a lot of guys who are probably underpaid relative to what they do because the Eagles jumped and signed them so early. Like they were giving out extensions. If you showed any kind of ability, the Eagles like, here's your extension.
That's right.
We want you cheap and we want you here for a while. And they were committed to that. And I think the Saints have tried to put Band-Aids on a lot of problems over the years and let their team get old. And I think that's the biggest thing. In the NFL, you always win as an ascending team. Your quarterback typically wins before he's the age of 30. Your defense is usually young. You look at that Eagles defense, they are a young, fast defense. Your offensive line is young. The other teams that are at the top of the league, whether you're talking about the Detroit Lions or whoever you're talking about, they're typically a younger team, and the Saints have been one of the older teams in the NFL. So those are the issues that they've got to deal with. And I think fans are smart enough to understand that. I think the biggest problem for the Saints has been that they thought that fans didn't have an appetite for any kind of short-term losing. I think fans would have much rather taken short-term losing with a plan than feeling that you were putting on the Band-Aids that they have for the last 4 seasons. Going back to the end of the Drew Brees era, it just felt like they didn't understand where they were across the league. But you look at a Tampa Bay team that has won 3 division titles in a row now. They took their financial hit. They're not as talented as the best teams in the league, but they're competitive because they realized they were getting old and expensive, and they decided to get cheaper, and they took their financial hit and they got better.
Yeah, and still won. Look, I agree with you 100% on everything you just said. We're probably not going to agree on what we talk about in the future, which is why this show, in my opinion, is great, because I can have guests on and disagree about it, and we can talk about it. And that is the future of this team. While I agree with everything you just said, and I think it's lumps that they should have taken lumps before and didn't. They kept kicking a can that is old and rusty and it's got a hole in it and you can't kick it anymore. That being said, unless you just want to stink, I don't know. They're in a position now to where before they didn't have to kick the can, but they did anyway. I think now you still kind of have to kick the can with the financial situation that they're in. And looking forward, we won't talk about number 4 just yet. We're going to get into him in just a minute. But overall, where this team is, David, I think they're going to have to restructure some contracts that the average fan doesn't understand why they're going to have to restructure them, because they just can't go forward. They can't get compliant in the next 2.5 weeks without doing so.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to take a minute. There are some deals that you just got to live with because they've already made those decisions, and they're unappealing contracts for other teams. You can't send some of these guys anywhere else. There's no destination right now for a DeMario Davis. As good as he is, it's not appealing. No team in the league's taking a 30-plus-year-old linebacker and saying, we're going to give you assets for that. You're not doing that for Cam Jordan. You're not doing it for Tyrann Mathieu. Teams are not going to take that deal on. So you may have to extend them, like you said, to cut them at a different time, or to move them at a different time, do something with them. But yeah, some of these guys you just got to live with. You got to live
Yeah.
with this, and you got to figure out how do you augment what they are able to do, because they're not all bad players. It's just that the contracts are not in alignment with what they can do at this stage of their careers. The Saints gave some reward contracts. The Alvin Kamara deal could be reviewed, be seen as a reward contract
completely.
for past deeds done rather than future production, because I don't think any of us feel like Alvin's best years are ahead of him. Like,
It can't
who's
be.
going to say that for him?
Yeah,
You know
he's
what I mean?
30 years old. You can't say that.
So, but what can you do? Like, you got to draft well. You got to search that waiver wire. You got to find some free agents who are willing to come here and do some prove-it deals, and you're going to have to eat it. I mean, it's just, that's what you're going to have to do. But what do you want as a Saints team? Are you expecting to win a Super Bowl now? No, but you should be able to compete for a division title next year. I think that that's a reasonable goal if you make solid moves in this division. There's no reason why you can't get to
100%.
9-8.
I agree 100%. And I think that can be done almost immediately. And that leads me into, we're going to come back to the personnel part of it in a minute, but I want to get your opinion on Kellen Moore. And look, I had been screaming, and while I would have been great, Aaron Glenn was never coming here. And I know the fans were upset. You didn't get your first guy. You didn't get your second guy. Mike McCarthy would have been great, but he's 61, 62 years old, whatever it is. To me, and Aaron Glenn's 52 years old, which I didn't realize until I started doing some deep looking into. The one thing I like about Kellen Moore, David, is that he's 36 years old or whatever it is. He's bringing in young coaches with him. And if there's any team in the league that needs an infusion of youth and a spark, it's this one. And I think starting with your coaching staff, I think that can set a tone for the future.
I don't care about the philosophy of the head coach as far as offense or defense. I know people get caught up in, is he a play caller? Is he
right?
Look at the history of the Saints when they've had their most success as far as head coach. Look at any team. It's not about whether or not they're great play callers. Because look, what is the play calling doing in Los Angeles right now? If you don't have players, it doesn't matter how great a play caller you are. Sean McVay can't do anything without the talent. What matters is what kind of organization and what kind of structure are you building? What are the expectations every day when people walk into the building? And the hallmark of the Sean Payton era was do your job, right? Do your job. That sign hanging over the practice facility, everybody understood coming in on a day-to-day basis what the expectations were. I think under Dennis Allen, that slipped as in the public's perception, and it slipped in the locker room as players have discussed it. It wasn't the same type of locker room. There is no continuity in that regard. Just because a guy's from the tree doesn't mean he can be the leader of the tree.
Exactly.
So to me, whether you're looking at Jim Moore or you look at Sean Payton, Jim Moore's a defensive guy, Sean Payton an offensive mind. The commonality of them both, it was, we're going to do this way. You're either on board with how we're doing this or you won't be here. And if you've got a head coach who understands that, and the players want that kind of certainty when they walk in the building. These coaches are doing this. This is your responsibility on the defensive line. This is what the linebackers are doing. If everybody walks into the building every day under a unified purpose, then you can win. The play calling, all those things will take care of themselves. You need better talent. Yes, you got to always have the talent is the ultimate advantage in professional sports. You got to have it. But if you don't have a defined purpose and an understanding of what your organization is, an identity, that word, which is we use so much, the Saints haven't had an identity for 5 years. What's been their identity? They've been hanging on to something. Now's your chance to reestablish an identity. What does New Orleans Saints football mean?
And, I liken it to exactly what you said. When you're talking about coaching, you could take, to me, the two best coaches in the National Football League right now are Andy Reid and Mike Tomlin, in my opinion. And you take Andy Reid, and what does he have that Pittsburgh doesn't have? A quarterback, of course. Maybe the greatest quarterback that's ever played the game when it's all said and done. And if you put Patrick Mahomes on the Steelers, then Mike Tomlin is going to be able to do the same thing. Nick Sirianni, to me, is a below-average coach, but he had what you talked about. They have a fantastic general manager. They have a fantastic structure built underneath Nick Sirianni that they were able to do what they needed to do. They bring in Saquon Barkley, and Jalen Hurts was good enough. So, like you talk about, it's the structure, it's the administrator, it's everything within. It's not just who the coach is.
Yeah, it's alignment. Like when the Saints were at their best, there was alignment throughout the organization. No matter who's been when the Jim Haslett era was working, There was alignment.
That's right.
You understood what the goals were. And then some individual things started getting in the way, and Jim Haslett made some bad decisions with, his quarterbacks and made some
And
mistakes
Katrina
there.
happened too. And that
And
didn't
Katrina
help.
happened, which nobody could foresee. But the alignment was there. You felt like going in. I knew that what the Saints were on a week-to-week basis. I think it feels like now when you watch a Saints game, I don't know which team is going to show up. I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know what the game plan or the strategy is. And like you said, Nick Sirianni does not give you an advantage as a strategist.
No,
but
not
those
at
guys
all.
know that Nick Sirianni is for them. They will fight for Nick Sirianni. He's their guy.
Oh, they absolutely will. And you talk about their defense, and just this year and what they did in the draft, you get Jalen Carr comes in and completely revamps the defensive line, which wasn't bad anyway. And Saquon Barkley changed the offense. So, I mean, you get those two impact guys on an already Super Bowl caliber team, and look what it takes. So I just think that people are so down, and that leads me back into the Saints, because people to me are always a little bit too optimistic when things look like they might be okay. And to me, they're always too down when things look like they're at their worst. And I just don't think, and I'm not just trying to be on the opposite side here of what most people think. I just don't think this team, despite the fact that the money woes are there, I think that you talk about winning the division. Is that enough in the grand scheme of things in the long term? No, of course not. You want your team to be able to win a Super Bowl. But I think in the short term, it would be good enough. And I really think the Saints aren't that far away from being able to do that. And I think that some significant changes and maybe 3 or 4 or 5 players this year can turn them back into the 9-8 or 10, even 10-7 kind of team that can win the division. I just don't think they're that far away if they can stay healthy as well.
I mean, look, you and I, this is a movie that's probably near and dear to both of us, is National Lampoon's Vacation, right? So the Saints are trying to get to Wally World, right? Saints are trying to get to Wally World. Along the way, if you're on your destination to get to wherever you're going, you're going to make stops, and all of them ain't going to be winners. You know what I mean? You pull off on the side of the road to go check out some attractions.
Sorry, folks.
Some of them are disappointing. So, that's the thing. It's like, what are your reasonable expectations? If the Saints came out to you and said, we expect to win the Super Bowl every year, you'd say that's ludicrous.
Exactly.
But if you're talking about making steps toward being a Super Bowl contender again, let's make reasonable steps. Okay, then I'm on board with that. I'm on board with that. And I think a reasonable expectation is for this team, with the amount of money you've already invested in this roster, it is not a 3-win, it is not a 4-win roster. Like, it's not that bad.
I agree. It wasn't a 5-win roster. It's way better than that.
It was but you didn't have a unity of purpose. They did not believe in the head coach, and you had injuries at critical times, and you lacked some playmakers. Yes, you absolutely lacked playmakers. Okay, address those things. Address those things as best you can. And I think if you play sound football on a day-to-day basis in this league, it's a league conditioned for everybody to be around 500. If you play sound football, you stop making big play mistakes. And we've seen it. The Saints gave up so many big plays to teams. That's where they really took advantage on a week-to-week basis. It was the big plays that killed them, their lack of them on offense, and their inability to stop them on defense. You take that out, that's 2 wins right there, I would imagine. That's 2 to 3 wins on your schedule right there if you're eliminating giving up the big play. So you can turn it around and get to 9 wins. I don't think that's unreasonable to ask for 1 year.
We keep talking about it, and I've talked about it on the show many times, but you think back and just go back this year. No, don't get me wrong. It may have changed the whole way of the season would have gone, and there's no question they needed to move on from Dennis Allen. But if you go back and look, after the big win against Dallas and they're 2-0, they're in position to beat Philadelphia. They score, which could have been, should have been, let me be Jim Mora, would have been the game-winning touchdown, but no. Saquon Barkley's still running down Poydras Street somewhere. We can't find him. We don't know what happened there. Then you don't allow Atlanta to score a touchdown. You score in the 20s, and you still lose. And they kick a 58-yard field goal. So just those 2 games, if you're 4-0 there, and it's not unrealistic to say that at all, it's a completely different season. The season has a completely different feel. So that's proof right there to me that this team was not that far off from being a decent football team.
We're never going to challenge for the Super Bowl, but they shouldn't have been as bad as they were. And you can correct a lot of their mistakes are correctable mistakes. Like, scheme is why you gave up those
That's
runs
right.
to Saquon Barkley. It's why you were giving up big plays in the Atlanta game, and they were able to get into field goal position when they were. You said you did a good job for the first 2 downs. Saints couldn't get off the field on 3rd down. So
There's
can
no
you
doubt.
fix that? Can you be 10% better there? If you're 10% better there, you're a far more competitive team, and we're having a different discussion. But yeah, overall, I don't think that you're if they were better, I think the when you're evaluating a coach, it's more than the win losses. It's how you got there, and I think that was the problem with Dennis, is how you were getting to where you were. And so ultimately, I think he just his career has shown that he's not a successful head coach.
No,
I don't want to
he's
say anything
DC.
else about him. It's not
Yeah.
fair for me to do that. I'll just say the stats show the man is not a successful head coach. Okay, you proved it, and let's move on. Dennis Allen is gone. I don't want to talk about Dennis Allen anymore. You know what I'm saying? Like we're moving past
Don't
that.
worry.
You have a new coach.
I'll
Let's go
say it out
forward.
for it. I'll say it out for you. I've been saying it. I'll keep saying it. It's okay. David Grubb here with us on the Dattitude podcast on this Monday morning, presented by Evangeline Securities. I know all the commenters in the queue. I know we got some comments out there. I'm going to show them after David is off with us, because he's got a limited time with it. I don't want to keep him on. We could be on here all morning talking about all afternoon now. I'm usually on in the morning. It's afternoon today. David, we're going to talk about Derek Carr, obviously, and Derek Carr. And I want to get your opinion on not, what I'll ask you what you think they might do in a minute, but your opinion on now the options. We've talked about the options on the show for multiple weeks now. And really where we are with this is, to me, whether you like him or don't like him, to me, common sense dictates he's back. And the reason why is the only legitimate option you have to get rid of him without just saying we're going to eat $50 million, because you got to get cap compliant. You could cut him post June 1 and save $30 million, but it doesn't save you to get to where you need to go this year. You would have to make so many moves. So that's why I'm saying the only legitimate move to me that makes common sense is to restructure. And I know Derek Carr haters don't want to hear this, but if you want to be good in the near term, you can't eat $50 million with all the dead money that you're already paying anyway to the other 3 guys that we talked about. I want to get your opinion on what you think this team is right now, and what's your opinion on what do you think they should do with Derek Carr?
Yeah, I'm not a giant Derek Carr fan, but
Right.
I'm with you on the logical part of it. Is he's your best chance to win, enough games this season to be competitive. And like you said, the financial hit just doesn't make sense. Like, what are you going to put out there that's better? First and foremost, Spencer Rattler's not better. Like,
100%.
and you're not going to draft better this year.
No, you got to wait till 26.
So if that's the case, then you got to ride with what you got. You paid this man to be here. That is what it is. And he gives you the best chance to win games. Your job now, this is why you hired the coach you hired, is to figure out how to put him in position to win. Here's what you know about Derek Carr. You give him a good running game. You give him a defense that can give him a lead, and he'll do okay. But if you're asking him to win games with his arm, he's not one of those guys. But there are very few of those in the NFL.
That's right.
Anyway.
That's right.
So he's in the vast middle of okay quarterbacks. He's over 30, which, like I said, most quarterbacks who reach their peak do so before 30 as far as their winning goes. They can put up numbers later in their career, but your winning comes before 30 because that's when you're cheap and young. Derek Carr is neither one of those things anymore, but he is your best chance to be competitive this season, which fans are demanding. You're saying you want to be competitive? If you're going to be competitive, bolster the running game, which wasn't his fault that only Alvin Kamara was the only available running back week in and week. That's not Derek Carr's fault. The offensive line being mediocre the last couple seasons, that wasn't Derek Carr's fault either. His wide receivers going down every week. Okay, I'm not going to discuss what guys have said on the internet, Michael Thomas, whatever. We could talk about whether or not he put guys at jeopardy. Okay, but do things that minimize those risks then. What is he best at? Vertical passing downfield, play action passing downfield. To do that, you need a running game. So let's fix that. That's something you can fix in the NFL. Running the football should be easier for the Saints than it is. And that's something they've not been good at the last several seasons. They have not gotten to the all kind of offensive line. When you look at the teams that both Philly, the 2 highest scoring offenses in the NFC, Philly and Detroit, what do they have in common? Dominant offensive lines. So the Saints need to start there no matter who your quarterback is,
100%.
whether you're drafted this year or next year or 2 years from now. You better get that line straight before you bring in somebody to be your long-term quarterback.
See, I thought we were going to disagree, and we 100% we're on the same page 100% here. And all I can think about when I have so many viewers on the show, I love them to death because they're part of the Dattitude family, but they want to tank. There's so many people that watch this show that want to tank, and all I can think is Herm Edwards and the old, you play to win the game, because that's what this is about. You want to win the game. And I think exactly what you said, you build in the trenches. You talk about, like we said with the Pelicans and how maybe the draft at the top isn't as strong, but overall the depth of this NBA draft coming up is solid. I think it's kind of the same in the NFL. There's the quarterback. This is not a quarterback kind of draft, but I think overall the talent in this draft, especially like for running back, for in the trenches. You talk about some other places in this draft. I just think defensive line, especially. I think there's so many things the Saints can do and look at to make this team better for the now, and then worry about get your quarterback in the 26th draft, which is going to be quarterback heavy again.
Yeah, you've got solid corners. That's one thing you do have. You need to work on that defensive line. Like I said, again, this league has always been about four-man pressure. If you can get four-man pressure in this league, you're going to have a good defense. The Saints have not been able to do that for 3 seasons. They've not been a team that could pressure up front. When the defense was at its best, even when it wasn't getting a ton of sacks, it was leading the league in pressures. Like you start from the line and build out. If your lines are not steady, you can't win in the NFL. And the Saints don't have enough talent on either the offense or defensive line. It doesn't matter. You could put John Unitas, you could put Joe Montana, it doesn't matter who the quarterback is. If your line is bad, it's the ballad of Archie Manning. If we're
talking about trying to explain forever.
So what are we doing here? If we're putting it's too many people to put it all on one guy. And I think that's been the problem. And Derek Carr's had his own missteps. No doubt. He's not media savvy. He doesn't do a great job in explaining himself at times. But the guy is still, look, there have been worse quarterbacks in Saints history. I'm sorry. Look, Jim Everett was worse. Like what are we doing? Like to put the onus on a guy when the team has not built itself properly, it's not on Derek Carr.
David, we're just keeping it positive, brother, today. That's what we're doing. We're keeping it positive here today. That's what we're trying to do on the Dattitude podcast. I do have one more Pelicans question for you, and that's how we're going to end this segment. But before we get there, are you giving me your opinion on what you think they should do? Because I agree with everything you said. What do you think that they will do? Again, March 12th is the day that Luke Johnson says they will have made all their decisions. They will become cap compliant by then. What do you think this team will do?
I think Derek Carr's with this team. I think certainly they will try to find someone to compete with him. I think they will look for somebody who's also a change-up. Because of the experience with Jalen Hurts, they're going to look for somebody who's a little more mobile, maybe to be a contrast.
Justin Fields?
Justin Fields can't throw. He's like Jalen Hurts. At least could complete is a solid thrower of the football. Like I said, he can be erratic at times, but I'm worried about Justin Fields and his ability to throw 20+ passes in a game.
Can Kellen Moore help that?
If you got a running back behind him.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like even with the Steelers, what did they do? They ran the football really effectively behind him. So if you're going to bring Justin Fields in, you bring him on cheap, you better get him cheap. And then you better stock that running back room. And that's what I think that is the area too, is the Saints need that contrasting style and runner. They kept bringing in guys who were like Alvin Kamara. You need somebody who can just give me 4 yards. Give me 4. I can
4 yards and a cloud of dust, baby.
Yards. Like that ability is still being ahead of the sticks is still the most important thing you can do on offense. And somebody who can fall forward and give you that I can count on those 4 yards on first down is a huge weapon to have.
And the running back situation in this draft is fantastic. And I think you can get one of those guys you're talking about, 3rd, 4th, maybe even 5th round. I think there are plenty of running backs in this draft. We're going to be talking about them going forward. All right, last question for you this afternoon. I go back to the Pelicans, and I had a comment. There is one I want to show. And Sean H., who is a regular member of the Dattitude family, says, how is Willie Green still the coach? And I forgot to ask you about that. I've been a Willie fan, but I got to admit, It is so frustrating. And I know he's a young coach, but when you get this far into your tenure, I know there's all kinds of excuses you can make. I'm not a big excuses guy. What do you think is the future for Willie Green with this team? Do you think it's past this year? And do you still have hope that he can be a long-term coach for this franchise?
Well, Willie was not going to get fired during the season.
Right,
I
of
think
course not.
the injuries and those things gave the Pelicans enough cover to look, Gail has shown that she's not
Loyal.
interested in paying multiple
Yep.
coaches at the same time and doing this. And like the Dennis Allen situation versus the Willie Green situation were two very different things. Because you had basically what was a mini revolt that was going on in the Saints amongst players, and the atmosphere is not the same with the Pelicans. The players
Yeah.
still respect Willie. They still listen to Willie. It's just that you're not getting what you need to get as far as results. You're not getting the innovation on offense. You're not getting the improvement on defense. Those things have not been there. So I think that Willie's future is cloudy, and that's being favorable. That's being kind, as to say it's just cloudy. I would say more than likely the Pelicans make a dramatic change this offseason. I think David Griffin understands that he will be in the spotlight. Because remember, David Griffin, the question is going to be, should David Griffin get to hire his fourth coach?
Yes.
And
Yes.
rarely does a general manager get to hire four coaches during their tenure. So I think David Griffin, for him, it becomes that thing a lot of executives get. It's either going to be him or me or both of us. So if you're David Griffin, the question, he's got to convince Gail Benson, he's got to convince the other folks who are influential on Airline Highway that he's the right guy to get the Pelicans out of this. And I think that means ultimately that you end up sacrificing Willie Green on the altar of success, because I think they're going to run it back with Zion Williamson. I think, they're going to gauge his value. But ultimately, I believe that Zion will be back next season. And if they're going to do that, it's going to be, you have to have a different team. You have to have a different style of play. You've got to get the tempo up, because that's when Zion is at his best, is when his team is running. So you've got to find greyhounds to run alongside him. And that's going to be a change. And I think that's why James Borrego, quite frankly, stayed, is because he felt like if there was going to be a change, he's the guy to step in and take that role.
Are you with me that if they would have never got rid of Monty, that this team would be so better off? That's just my opinion. I'm a huge Monty fan.
I don't know about that, just because I think it's, it had to deal with what the alignment, again, with the front office. Everybody was not in alignment then. The
Well, that's
decisions
definitely true.
Dell Demps was kind of hamstrung in that role at the time. There was this thing of, do we keep doing this with older vets, or do we try to get young players? And I think that's been the thing for the Pelicans, is a lack of vision. Because I don't think the Pelicans in 22 years have established an identity. They kind of did it when they were the Hornets, when they had Chris Paul and David West, but they bailed on that too early. And now, because they thought David West was done. And David West made two more All-Star teams and went to the finals twice and won a championship with the Warriors. And they thought Tyson Chandler was done. He went on to win a title and won a Defensive Player of the Year award. They bailed on that team too early, and I think since then they've hung around with guys too long, and it's been to their detriment. But there will be major shakeups this offseason, but there are some real things to hope for, like Trey Murphy, who I do believe can be an all-star in this league.
I think he's gonna be a superstar, not just an all-star.
The guy has everything that you're looking for, right? Like he could be maybe not the 1A player who leads you to a championship, but he's the face of a franchise.
Yeah.
He's the guy who could step in front of the media and make fans love to be around the New Orleans Pelicans. And as good as Zion is, he's not an engaging personality. He doesn't like to do the handshaking and the glad handing. Trey is a politician in that regard. Trey will kiss the babies and shake the hands.
Man, you talk about what DeJounte Murray could do for Zion. I think DeJounte Murray for Trey could make him like legit, like, one of the top 10 or 15 players in this league. I mean, I really think that's what he can be. And I think that DeJounte Murray coming in helps Trey Murphy as much as it helps anyone.
Trey's the modern NBA player, right? He can run in transition. He shoots the three. He's tall. He's athletic. He finishes above the rim. He's that mid-range game. If he can get that one dribble pull-up in between game, what can you do with him then? He's a 3-level scorer. And once he becomes a 3-level scorer, it's over.
Yeah, we never even talked about Brandon Ingram, and It's kind of sad that it came to it, but I think they just held on to him maybe a little bit too long. They should have made the move, I think, when they could have got probably more for him. Yeah.
2 years ago, they should have made that move.
We were talking about that before. So, David Grubb, it is not going to be as long next time. I don't know the last time you won. I didn't go back and look, but whatever it is, it's going to be a lot sooner this next time. I appreciate you so much for coming on the Dattitude podcast this afternoon, and we will talk to you soon.
And man, Jim, always a pleasure. Call me up anytime.
Thank you. We'll talk to you soon. David Grubb, everybody. Love having him on the show. Again, I don't know why it took so long to have on him, but I guess it's probably mostly because we haven't talked enough about the Pelicans, and the Saints story is lingered this year more than it normally does. And that's where we are. We got a lot of comments in the queue. We're going to get back to Mono E Monday in just a minute. If you got some comments or questions about the Saints, because we are going to talk about, if you could talk about Pelicans if you want to, but we're going to talk mostly Saints the rest of the way for about another, about another 15 minutes or so. But first, we told you earlier, we were letting you know more about how Evangeline Securities can help you figure out what your family-run or privately held business might be worth and whether it's time to sell. How do they do it? Well, after their complimentary valuation of your company, if you decide to proceed, that's completely up to you. Obviously, you'll have the tools to be able to do that, to make that decision. Native New Orleanians, Nick Braden, Ron Hemelt, and the folks at Evangeline, they can then begin an extensive auction process among established private equity funds from around the world. And they can maximize the return for the founder and his or her family. Evangeline Securities is the top producer on their platform, and there are very few companies like them in this area. I know I say that every show, but it's true. Look it up. I'm telling you. They are people you can depend on. Nick Braden, Ron Hemelt, none with their dedication and success. They are fully licensed and ready to serve you. So get in touch with Nick and Ron about what's really important. You know what it is. It's the rest of your life. And you can find them at www.evangelinesecurities.com. All right, no Gabe today. But we do have more Mono E Monday, and all is right with the world. UBN is here now. We can start the show. You missed us talking about Brandon Mooney a little while ago. You're going to have to go back and check it out. All right, some comments that we missed from earlier. Let's see. I don't know what Christian's talking about, what he's been eating. Not really 100% sure. Jimmy Rosen says he doesn't think Carr makes it more than 1 year. I think he either makes it no years or he makes it at least 2. I think there's almost zero chance that it's just 1. We've talked about this before. And we're going to talk a lot about David Carr really the rest of the show because that's where we are. But if they want to save any money whatsoever, we talked about one way that they could save money, but we didn't tell you what it was. And really the only logical possibility for saving money, and even then you don't save a lot of money. You can save $11 million if you can find a trade partner. Okay? And don't laugh. I know a lot of you Derek Carr haters are like, you're not going to find a trade partner. Not true. Plenty of teams out there that I think would want him, and including one that probably wanted him before and wishes they would have gone that route. The New York Jets. Would they be willing to make a trade? What do they have to offer? Not sure. But even then, again, you'd add $39 million to the $43 million the Saints are already eating. You're talking about eating $82 million of cap space. Does this team want to do that? Is that the right answer? That's why I think common sense says and dictates. Again, you can not like me. You can say mean things to me in the chat, whatever you want. Being logical. We're logical on this show. We tell you reality. We don't tell you what you want to hear or what you think is best or whatever. We tell you what is reality and what is logic. And I know it's interesting because what I didn't say earlier, and I meant to, is since we've been on the show last Wednesday, or really since last Monday, I've been trying to pay attention to what a lot of other people in the local media, and not just the regulars that I talk about, and not just the regulars that I talk to. Because more and more the past week, I think it's because local media want the Saints to move on from Derek Carr more than what's logical and rational. You can want something to happen. That doesn't make it logical and rational. And I assume, like an idiot, that David that David Grubb would come on the show, and I knew he's not a big Carr fan, so I expected him to say that he wanted to move on from Derek Carr, and he didn't say that, even though he's not a Carr fan. And this is a perfect example for the rest of you out there. Perfect example of someone who doesn't really like Derek Carr and doesn't think he's the future of this franchise. But if you want to win in the near future, we're not going to debate the whole losing, tanking thing again. Tanking's stupid, okay? Even kids that, when I talked about career day earlier in this show, and we had career day, and I went and talked to groups of kids, I did have kids asking me about the Saints and what they thought, and I asked them, I can believe it or not, there are people out there that want the Saints to lose, and I just lost about 10 viewers. Just like that. 20, whatever. Because they don't want to hear it. They want the tank. What does tanking do for you besides getting you a team that's a loser? It helps you rebuild. Helps you rebuild what? It gets you a better draft pick in the first round, maybe the second round. After that, it does nothing for you. It does nothing. So that's why when David Grubb came in and said what he said, and completely agree, that if you want to win in the near future, and you could do both at the same time. I don't know how many ways to say this. Derek Carr is not the bridge to the future. There's no question. But you can rebuild and still be a decent competitive football team at the same time. We showed you a chart on Wednesday, and Gabe and I, or was it either Monday or Wednesday? I don't remember what day it was. But Gabe and I got into a long discussion, if that's what you want to call it, about what losing does for you. And I have numbers that prove, at least the last 3 years, and I can go back further than that losing has done nothing for these teams that have drafted early on. Teams that are drafted in the top 10, they don't win. They don't win the next year. They don't win in the long term. There are exceptions. Detroit, Minnesota, which drafted, I think, 9th or 10th last year. But in the grand scheme of things, those are rare exceptions. Those are not the rule. There are the exceptions. So that's why when you go back to this comment, I'll show it again from Jimmy. He doesn't think Carr makes it for one more year. I think either the Saints are going to bite the bullet on Derek Carr, and they're just going to cut him, and they're going to eat the $50 million and say to hell with it, and probably do it as a post-June 1 cut and save 30. It doesn't get you cap compliant, but it saves you money in the long run that you can put towards the salary cap later. That's the only thing it does. It doesn't help you right now. It doesn't even kind of help you right now. Not even a little bit. Okay? So that is a possibility. I just don't think it's likely. But either they do that or they find a trade, and that means he's got no more years. But I think there's almost no chance that he's got just one more year. I think it's either 0 or it's 2 or 3. And I think it's likely 2 or 3. And I think what happens is, in my opinion, again, what makes the most sense, and you look at next year and what's in this draft coming up next year, again, things we'll talk about in future shows in season 5. We're going to talk plenty about this coming up. But the quarterbacks that are in the 2026 draft, and I'm not just talking about Garrett Nussmeier, who is the son of our new offensive coordinator, Doug Nussmeier. He's just one of multiple quarterbacks in the 2026 draft that I think can be NFL quarterbacks. Right now, to me, the only two that are even, I mean, yeah, sure, but somebody might slip through the cracks and surprise us, and we never heard of Brock Purdy before he was drafted as Mr. Irrelevant. It happens. But in the grand scheme of things, the two most likely, and it's not just because they're going to be the first 2 picks, I just think there are only 2. And I really think there's only one. I think Cam Ward's the only quarterback in this coming draft that's an NFL quarterback. I mean, could Jackson Dart prove us wrong? Maybe. But I'm not a fan of Shedeur Sanders I think he's a fantastic athlete. I think he can play in the NFL. I'm just not sure he can be an everyday NFL quarterback. Saints have other moves to make besides just Derek Carr as well. What are they going to do? How are they going to restructure Demario Davis? How are they going to restructure Tyrann Mathieu? How are they going to restructure Cam Jordan? Are they just going to cut any of those guys? Something I talked about being the editor of the Driftwood earlier. The office, indeed, Kyle Sherman was in the student union. I think, wasn't it? It was in the building with the student union. I don't necessarily, it might not have been in the union itself. That's a long time ago. I can't believe I don't remember that. Alvin Kamara, Taysom Hill, more contracts that need to be restructured. again, with Taysom especially, we talked about him. It doesn't save any money to cut Taysom Hill. They're not going to cut Taysom Hill. They're going to have to restructure his contract. Looking forward to Kellen's youth. I agree. Gary says, sorry about that. I'm having trouble with this mouse again. There we go. Great discussion, truthful statements. I mean, that's what we try to do here. What else we got? Kyle says in the trenches, no doubt about it. The Billy Joes would be Pro Bowlers behind the Eagles line. I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't go that far. David Dukas says, I'm always on the same page as him, and he loves it. Well, that's good. Well, that's another question I asked the little kids. Why would you watch a show with a host that you don't agree with? I mean, some people just like torture. But there are all kinds of reasons that, look, we don't have to agree, okay? We don't have to agree. In fact, so many times we're not going to agree. We can, by the way, we can disagree without name calling. I told, I don't even remember who it was last week, but called someone a name. I wish I wouldn't have called them a name and said I was sorry, and everything was cool after that. But people come at you sometimes. You want to hear some of the comments that I get, just the hate mail I get. And that leads me to get into some of the comments we saw from last Wednesday's show that I did want to talk about when we talk about Derek Carr. Scott Brantley said, the one thing that I took away from your conversation with Gabe, and again, if you didn't hear it, you should go back and watch it. So it is from Wednesday's show. I showed a chart. It proves, well, it doesn't prove. I guess it doesn't prove, but it shows a point that I was trying to make. And the point I was trying to make was that drafting in the top 10 doesn't necessarily do anything for you. Again, there are exceptions with Detroit 3 years ago and Minnesota last year, who drafted, I think, 9th or 10th. Rare exceptions. And Scott says the one thing he took away from the conversation with Gabe is that in order to be perennially successful year to year in the NFL, you must have a competent staff and scouting department. So you're drafting the good players that fit in your vision and your scheme. Amen. 100% agree with that. That's not necessarily about Derek Carr and quarterback. That's just about common sense. This is a common sense show. This is a reality-based show. We tell you what it's like in reality. And the reality is the Saints haven't had a lot of good drafts lately. I think last year was a good one. The jury's still out. I was disappointed in Kool-Aid McKinstry a little bit, but now we're going to find a whole lot about him because he's probably going to start. I was happy with Fuaga. Bob Means could be a starter. I'm okay with Spencer Rattler as a backup. Will he remain in that capacity? I don't know. So I think last year, in the grand scheme of things, could be a really good draft for this team. There are other spots as well. We'll revisit last year's draft. Maybe that's a whole show. We'll go back and talk about it. Maybe we'll go back and revisit the last 5 drafts. Doug H3859 said left a comment from yesterday. Just watched the show from Wednesday. Love seeing the West Bank come out of me. Disagrees with Gabe on tanking. Doesn't guarantee the future opportunity for success. The Texans are better because of DeMeco Ryans. Absolutely. I mean, the Texans are one of those teams that drafted twice in the same round. They had, the first and the second pick, or was it the second? No, it was the second and the third pick after Carolina 2 years ago. Yeah, they got better. They had the second and the third pick. Nobody gets the second and the third, but that's a rare thing, okay? Arizona got 2 picks in the top 3 or 4 not too long ago. What did it do for them? They're still below average. Now, SA3VUS114 said, I can't believe I'm saying this, but we should, quote unquote, try for Arch Manning. It's the closest thing to a sure thing when it comes to an NFL-ready person. It would change our city and franchise for the next 18 years. Well, a few things. Even if, okay, we've talked about this as well before. I hate to keep repeating myself, but people are talking about it, so I'll bring it up again. Even if you wanted to decide that that's the route we're going to take, okay, you want Arch Manning. First of all, you don't know if he's coming out next year. And in fact, from the people that I listen to and trust, he's not coming out next year. So what would that do for you? Second of all, tanking doesn't mean you're going to have the number one pick. You could screw that up easily. You could be tied for last place with 3 other teams going into the last 2 weeks of the season. You've got 2 wins, and you win a game you're not supposed to win. Happens all the time. Now you're not tied for anything. Now you got the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th pick. And so all tanking did was get you a crappy pick or not as good a pick as the number 1 pick, and you still lost. No, it's stupid. And Scott Labourte says, probably true. Another reason to not necessarily go for Arch. Archie would never, first of all, it wouldn't be Archie, it'd be the entire Manning family. But Archie would never let Arch be drafted by us. Well, I mean, the grand scheme of things, you don't necessarily have a choice, right? But you could say, it's been done before. Ask Eli. He came out and said neither of his sons will ever play it down for the Saints. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, you don't have a choice, but you can put pressure on a team to say, we don't want to go there. If you are up there at the top, I don't know. George Touche, 2257 says, rebuild from scratch means getting rid of Carr and Taysom Hill and Jordan and all the other old or injured players on both offense and defense, and trading back in the 2025 draft to get additional picks for next year and all the dead weight salary. Do you know how much dead weight salary? You talk about dead weight salary cap. Do you realize what kind of dead money? You'd be the laugh. I mean, some people say the laugh. You'd be the model of laughing stock forever. And I'm talking about decades from now. If you cut Carr, Taysom Hill, and Jordan, you're talking about you would be eating approximately, I think it'd be somewhere over 110, 120 million dollars. You'd have dead money. If the salary cap is 277 million or 279 million, whatever it is, you'd have 120 million that was dead cap money for players that aren't playing for you. What are you, a moron? I'm not calling you a name. I'm asking you if you're a moron. I'm not calling you a moron. Good chance not watching anyway. Pelicans Nola, 4367. How about cut Derek Carr and take the quarterback from Texas that beat Arch Manning? We just tell you why. Mr. Antoine, 25. Just cut. Here's my favorite one. Just cut Carr now. He delays development and make him a post-June 1st cut. Okay. You want to cut someone that affects post-development? What about Alvin Kamara? He affects development. He's making enough money that he's affecting the future development. You want to cut Alvin Kamara too? No, not Alvin Kamara. You don't want to cut him. Why not? The same philosophy. You want to cut Derek Carr with nothing behind him, with no quarterback to roll with. Hope you could get somebody in free agency that would come in here and do what? I mean, if you just want to stink, yeah, sure. Cut them all. Go ahead. Just cut everybody. Just have a team that's all making minimum salaries. It's just ridiculous. Kyle Sherman, back to current comments. Keep Carr building the trenches. That's what we've talked about. Got to. Apathy just wants someone to emerge. That's the only expectation in 2025. Someone step up and show they can be built around. I don't think that's what you're going to get in 2020. I don't think that's what 2025 is about. I don't think you're going to have players that you're building around. Maybe. I mean, now it depends on what you mean. Usually when I hear build around, I'm thinking you're meaning skill players. So maybe you don't necessarily mean that when you're building around. Apathy, you're right. Loomis does not trade down. It's not Loomis that doesn't trade down. It's more of Sean Payton never wanted to trade down. Would Loomis trade down? I'm not saying I'm betting on it, but I think it's a possibility. Sean wants to know how this team would compare to the Steve Walsh era Saints. The Steve Walsh era Saints were mediocre. Steve Walsh stunk. Steve Walsh was terrible. But the Saints were mediocre because they had a really good defense and salary cap issues were a lot different back then. It was a different world back then when Steve Walsh played and before the year that Bobby Hebert was going. And Bobby Hebert was, look, I'm not going to trash Bobby Hebert, but I mean, he probably hates me for saying this if he ever hears this. But Bobby Hebert and Derek Carr are probably a lot alike. Very similar quarterbacks. Very similar. Where would you rank Derek Carr? Maybe that's another show. Where would you rank Derek Carr in the history of Saints quarterbacks? And look, it's not a long, solid history by any means. So if you said Derek Carr was the third best quarterback that ever played for the Saints, you wouldn't really be saying a lot, right? In the grand scheme of things. But where would you put Derek Carr? I mean, obviously, there's one, and then two is like the distance from California to Texas. But who is two? Archie Manning? Okay. Maybe not for some people. But after that, you really got to think about it, right? I mean, I think Jeff Blake would have been a really quarterback if he didn't get hurt and stayed here for a while. I'm trying to think. Jim Everett, he wasn't any good. I mean, you think about the quarterbacks as you go through time. I mean, Billy Kilmer, if you're old enough, how good was he? I don't know. I remember him from being a Redskin. You go back before Derek Carr. Aaron Brooks wasn't as good as Derek. There's no way. I mean, I'm not railing on Aaron Brooks. He was fine. He was okay. But he wasn't as good as Derek Carr is. You go back before then. Billy Joe stunk. Danny Werfel stunk. Going back in time as I'm trying to think about it. Jake Delhomme, we don't know how good he would have been. He never really played. Going back in time even further. Again, Jim Everett. I don't know. Might have been good. Bobby Hebert, Steve Walsh, whatever. Dave Wilson. I mean, Derek Carr legitimately might be the third best quarterback that has ever played on this team. Fourth, maybe. UBN says Carr ranked just behind the Rat. Ugh. Man. You notice how I steered away from that talk today? I can't do that today. I really can't. All right. I said I was going to try to hold the show to an hour and a half today, and I think we're going to be able to do it. Look, we're going to talk more about this. Doug Mouton is coming on the show on Wednesday as we have the season 4 finale. And here's Kyle Sherman's rankings. I don't necessarily agree, but I actually, Drew's number one. Anybody argues that, I would literally block them from watching the show. Then he's got Bobby, Archie, and Carr. The point is, whether I agree with that order or not, and I don't necessarily agree with that order. The point is, I think there really isn't much of a debate that those are the top 4. And in theory, you could probably find someone who maybe could make an argument for Aaron Brooks. He did win the Saints' first playoff game. He was okay. If you really hate Derek Carr enough, you probably can make an argument that he's number 4. But there's no question. And again, this isn't saying a lot about the history of the New Orleans Saints quarterbacks, but there is zero question that Derek Carr's in the top 5. If he never plays another down for the New Orleans Saints, he is in the top 5. No doubt. Doug Mouton will be here on Wednesday. We'll talk more about this. This will be probably the topic of conversation. If it is Derek Carr, I want to get his opinion on whether he thinks it's going to be Derek Carr, because he had an interesting discussion on 4th down and 4 last night with Ross Jackson. Again, the New Orleans sports media, in a grand scheme of things, the more I listen to them, I don't know if they know something I don't, if they really believe this, or they're just trying to will it into existence. I think they're tired about writing about Derek Carr. Do they really believe that Derek Carr is done here? Do they really believe that? I don't know if they believe it or not. I just think that, again, common sense tells me maybe 90% is too high, but I think it's at least 80. I think it's at least 80% that Derek Carr is back here as the quarterback on opening day in 2025. Logic tells you that that's the case, unless, Kellen, you're not going to have a first-year coach who's just willing to say, you know what, I don't care if we stink or not. I just don't see it. I can't see a first-year coach willing to do that. And so a first-year coach is going to know his best chance to win is with Derek Carr. Abdi says a couple of my colleagues think he should be, meaning cut. Yeah, I know. I mean, I listened to Luke Johnson on this podcast last week say that he thought it was a 55% chance Carr would come back. And then I listened to him on the Saints Insider podcast after he talked to me, basically trying to will it into existence. He's not the only he's not the only Times-Picayune Saints beat writer who's saying this, who's thinking this, who's talking that way. He's certainly not. I mean, look, sometimes I think the Fanboys podcast, sometimes I think they're just saying it because that's where they know they'll get more viewers if they say that. I don't know if maybe they really believe it, maybe they don't. But they certainly hype it up, and I haven't listened as much lately because it kind of drives me nuts. So maybe they're just saying that because they think that's how they drive their audience. And some people will look, if you don't realize this, then I don't know what to tell you. But some people will say whatever their audience wants to hear so they drive their numbers up. I'm never going to do that. I am never, ever going to tell you something that I think you want to hear so I'll get more people come back and watch the show on Wednesday. I'm never going to do that. I'm going to tell you what I think. Maybe they really do. Maybe I'm in the minority now and thinking that he's going to be back. I know I have the highest percentage of him coming back than anyone else. Again, because common sense tells you he's coming back. The Saints you add $50 million of dead cap space to the $43 million they're already eating. I mean, I don't need to tell you, I'm not a math whiz. That's just Carr and the dead money. That's $93 million right there. So then you're literally forced to restructure every other contract. I just don't see the Saints doing that. I think they will cut someone that we're not talking about right now. They will cut, I'm not saying Cam Jordan per se, but they will cut a Cam Jordan or a Demario Davis or a Tyrann Mathieu or a Taysom Hill or maybe even Alvin Kamara. I doubt it. Probably not Galvin Kamara, but I think they're going to cut somebody. So that's more dead cap space if you cut any of those guys. That's why when you talk about order of who you're going to cut, I get it. Kellen Moore is going to want his own quarterback. I just don't think it's right now. I think he's going to want to roll and want to win with Derek Carr, and he knows that he's got a long leash, and he's here for probably 3, 4, 5 years at the bare minimum. And he could be here a long time. And you let Carr come in, and you be the bridge to whoever the next quarterback that I think is currently not on this roster. Exactly, Sean. See, that's why you're thinking Aaron Brooks got us to the playoffs. That's why some people might have Aaron Brooks in there. I mean, Aaron Brooks was the winning quarterback on the Saints' first ever playoff victorious team. You know about quarterbacks that got into the playoffs. So what? If you're talking about rankings, that doesn't mean anything to me. That means literally nada, nothing. Because there are only 2 quarterbacks in the history of this franchise that have ever won a playoff game. So getting me to the playoffs don't mean jack squat, okay? And Aaron Brooks just happened to be on a team that got lucky and whatever. Hakeem dropped the ball and Brian Milton fell on it. It wasn't, Aaron Brooks did have an okay game that day. But Drew Brees won all the other ones. Let's see. There's a post on Saints Report that says the Saints can get under the cap by $14 million without even touching Carr's contract. My ass is on fire. I don't believe that for 1 second. That's leading to believe that you just cut Carr and now you're eating $93 million. I don't believe that for 1 second. I'm no cap expert, and I needed help in math. But I know what adds up to 279. I can figure that out. And it ain't by eating $50 million. It just ain't. Again, breaking news this morning because Sean brings it up. What do I think of the defensive passing game coordinator coach hire from Texas? Well, I think it's fantastic because he's a graduate of Archbishop Shaw High School. If you missed it this morning, the Saints have hired Terry Joseph, who has been in the collegiate ranks, coached at Texas. Texas he was the passing game coordinator defensively for the Longhorns. They were 7th in passing yardage allowed last year, just under 180 yards a game. And they were number 1 in college football with 22 interceptions. He is now going to be the defensive backs coach for the Saints. I'm happy with that. They also hired let me go back up to the top here. They hired a assistant special teams coach. Kyle Wilbur is now the assistant special teams coach to Phil Galliano, who was the previous assistant special teams coach. They had that opening when Darren Rizzi went to Denver. So breaking news this morning, if you missed it earlier. And Who Dat Daddy finally made it. Well, you made it just in time for us to say bye-bye for the day. Who Dat Daddy? You like the hire as well. All right, again, I want to thank today's guest. Oh, David Grubb. And by the way, before I thank today's guest, I did tell you earlier, I was going to tell you how you can find me. I am riding in the crew of Endymion. I am not the Grand Marshal. No, I'm just a regular dude riding on a regular float. And if you want to know where I'm riding, if you plan on going to Endymion on Saturday night, you can get in touch with me either at jderry@theadvocate.com or you can find me on X, Jim Derry Jr. Either one of those ways. If you send me a direct message, I will send you a message back and tell you what float I'm on and what position. And if you come and yell at me, or probably better off to bring a sign, I will tell you where I'm at in Endymion. I just don't want to. We have a lot more. Last year I said exactly where I was, and I got a few people come, but there's too many people that watch the show now. There are about 3 or 4 times the people that watched the show, maybe more than that, last year. So I'm just not going to give out the information. Yeah, UBN, you're right. Don't tell people they might throw stuff at me. That too. So anyway, if you reach out to me, I'll tell you where I'm at. I want to thank today's guest, David Grubb, and you on Mono E Monday. We had a weird starting time again. Had some issues. My wife had a doctor's appointment that I found that I thought it was necessary that I attend. And that was at 9 this morning. And I knew we weren't going to get back till about 11 or so and needed to prep a little bit more for the show. So that was why we were on in the afternoon. We will be back at our regular time on Wednesday, when we will welcome in Douglas Mouton, WWL sports director. That will be an All Saints show for the most part. We may touch on a couple other things, but that's going to be pretty much All Saints. And a lot of stuff we talked about today and have been talking about, and then I'm going to take a break. I will say that if something major is probably going to happen one way or the other. If they cut Derek Carr or keep Derek Carr and they announce that, I may have an impromptu show on whatever day that is while I'm gone. I'm only going out of town for, I think, 3 of the days that I'm gone. But after Wednesday's show, we are not scheduled to be back on again. Season 5 premiere will be on March the 17th, Monday, March the 17th. Then we'll be back to 3 days a week. And when I come back, we'll talk about some March Madness, and we will talk about LSU baseball and other local baseball. But we're probably going to start shifting our focus towards the NFL draft as well. So that'll be when we come back again. A little break coming up. And you are right, Apathy. It won't be just for you. If they cut Carr, it's going to be a hilarious show. It will be a hilarious show. Look, I won't be mad if they do it. It'll just prove that maybe the fanboys are right. Maybe the other local media know more than I know. Maybe common sense takes a back seat. I just don't see it. I just don't see how they can do it. And look, whether you like them or don't like them, I just don't see how they can legitimately do. Look, one thing I will be shocked about, absolutely floored. Okay. And I'm not opening up a can of worms. I'm just telling you. I'll be absolutely floored if Kellen Moore says, I'm willing to go into next season with Spencer Rattler as my quarterback. I will be absolutely shocked, floored, whatever you want to call it. Who Dat Daddy says they're going to cut him? Sean, you got a good question. I mean, it's a good. Do I think Derek Carr wants to be here? Here's the thing. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. I mean, he's going to be making a crap ton of money. I think he's okay with being here, yes. And I think that if Kellen Moore wants him here and they sit down and have a talk, he'll be fine. Kyle says, take care. I hope my wife is feeling better. Thank you. Appreciate that. I will also be on Inside New Orleans this afternoon at 4:35 p.m. with Eric Asher. That's just 2 hours from right now if you're watching us live. You can find that on the Ticket 106.1 FM. You can also listen online, and I know you can listen to the show after the fact as well. Speaking of listening after the fact, you may be doing that right now. Reminder to subscribe to our Dattitude YouTube page. Click the little bell to receive notifications when we go on the air live. You can also find us wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Spotify, and many more. You can also find a replay of the show on NOLA.com/sports. You can find me on bet.nola.com and all of our insiders, all of their stuff, all of the news, breaking news on the Saints on NOLA.com/Saints. Again, one more show in season number 4. Of course, that impromptu show whenever what happens with Derek Carr as well. Until then, we will see you on Wednesday with Doug Mouton. Everyone have a great couple days. Take it easy, my friends.
If you're looking for the latest scoop and in-depth interviews on the Saints, the NFL, the Pelicans, LSU, along with the best bets of the week, then lucky you. Along with high-powered, in-the-know guests who cover our teams, Jim Derry brings plenty of Dattitude. And he'll always tell you the way it is, or at least the way he thinks it is.